Hundreds of thousands of protesters in France have staged more strikes and more rallies against the government's pension reforms, with some demonstrators clashing with riot police. People are angry after legislation to raise the retirement age in France from 62 to 64 was forced through by President Emmanuel Macron's government. Our Paris correspondent Lucy Williamson reports.
The temperature rose as the sun went down. Across France, fires burned like beliefs, as bright as fever. Young protesters with their rocks and bottles disappearing in clouds of tear gas fired by riot police in Bordeaux, in Nantes and in Paris.
It took minutes for this peaceful protest to turn violent. Hidden amongst the main demonstration, masked protesters who are now taking on the police.
Running through the lines of police, the white and black helmets of the specialist units known as Brav M, rapid reaction teams tasked with stamping out trouble. A new target for protesters after growing allegations of abuse. A video emerged last week apparently showing Brav M officers hitting a protester in the face. And an audio recording appears to have captured threats, intimidation and racist insults against a group of student protesters. Next time you won't be going to the police station, you'll be going to the hospital, one officer is heard saying. Salome was one of them. She's since filed a complaint and was back out protesting.
It's important to have policemen that are able to contain violence and to protect people. But in that case, the violence was against us. They were not protecting us. We must have been protected from them. That is really worrying to me.
The protests across France were, as usual, largely peaceful and smaller than last week. But police say some mainstream protesters are joining agitators in attacking them.
After the COVID, after everything that happened to France, the inflation and everything, people start to be really tense. And that doesn't help to reduce the violence against the police, because the police is representing the state. So in a way, when you attack the police, you might feel you're protesting against the state.
Fires are burning across France as President Macron struggles for a way out of this crisis, with political negotiations frozen and the streets on fire. Lucy Williamson, BBC News, Paris.
Let's talk to our Paris correspondent, Hugh Schofield. Hugh, the protests go on. How much disruption are they causing as they continue?
Well, in a way, surprisingly little. I mean, this isn't Israel, which has been closed down by a general strike, as you've been reporting. Yesterday, there were demonstrations. There was problems on the day in public transport and schools and so on. But I mean, it wasn't a general strike. Life went on. Economic life and the whole went on. What it's doing is kind of sapping the morale of the country, though. And there's this general feeling that the country is on a bit of a brink. And that this is going nowhere, that every week or so there is another day like this in which violence is becoming more normal, and that, underlying it all is a political crisis and a kind of state of political paralysis, which is condemning the country into sort of decline. The crisis is less to do with, declining GDP or, economic figures being hit or anything like that. It's much more to do with the state of the country and the feeling that we're, this is just digging into a deeper and deeper morass.
You say that this seems to be sapping the morale of the country. Do you get any sense that the continuing demonstrations and everything else is changing public opinion at all?
Not really. I mean, opinions get more and more entrenched, I suppose. There's no real indication that the big majority against the reform is changing. I mean, what we saw yesterday was possibly a smaller number of protesters out and demonstrators out. From the government's point of view, there was good news also that the bin strike seems to be over. But a lot of this is to do with the fact that striking is not a neutral business. It costs workers money, and after 3 weeks on strike, people just give up. So there are sort of cracks, if you like, in the opposition movement. But I mean, in general, one has to say that it's still very, very strong. And on the other side, that there are noises from certain members of the government who are obviously getting the willies about all of this. But Macron himself seems to be determined and saying that if we start talking about a pause in implementing this law or anything like that, we might as well just give up.
So at this stage, for Emmanuel Macron, no real clear way of emerging from this standoff?
Not as it stands, no. I mean, there are sort of noises, I'm saying. I mean, Elisabeth Borne, the Prime Minister, is talking about inviting the inter-syndical, that means all the unions, to see her next week. Good sign, possible sort of goodwill. They'll go, they say, to these talks. But, as soon as you look any deeper, you'll see that what the Prime Minister wants to talk about is labour in its sort of global sort of context, problems of lengthy careers, people with difficult careers, how they might be made easier and so on. And what the unions want to talk about is pushing back the pension age from 62 to 64 and how to stop that. So they may go to talks, but will they have anything to talk about?
Hugh, thank you very much. Hugh Schofield, live there, our Paris correspondent.